Welcome, everybody. I think we are going to jump right in. It is a real honor to have Karen Sherman here, the president of the Aquila Institute and author of Brick by Brick, and also Dr. Joyce Banda and Judge Najla Yakubi. Um, Ayoubi. We will be putting the bios in the chat so that you can learn more about them and we save time and have more time to have a conversation. It seems very fitting today to have this conversation as it's Women's Equity Day today. So congratulations to all the women out there. And let me just begin by starting really with Karen Sherman, who was the inspiration for this event and her book, and ask you, Karen, how did you come to write this book, and what was the motivation for it, and what are you hoping people will take away after reading it?
Well, thank you, Ina, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining this conversation, particularly at the end of August when so many people are on vacation. I really appreciate it. So Brick by Brick really tells the story of the year that I moved to Rwanda with my 3 sons for my work with Women for Women International, which is an organization that helps women survivors of war and conflict rebuild their lives. And so I had worked there for about a decade and traveled back and forth to conflict zones around the world, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Congo, Rwanda, Bosnia, Kosovo, all over the world, really some of the worst places on earth to be a woman. And, the contrast between my life here in the United States and the lives of so many women around the world felt that it was an important story to share. And, I've really straddled the developed and the developing world for most of my professional career. Even before Women for Women, I had spent 15 years working throughout the former Soviet Union with women. And so this book was really an opportunity to share some things that I've learned from other women, and actually particularly with other women. That was really the thinking behind Brick by Brick. And so, you had asked about some of the key takeaways. And for me, it's really that, we have made so much progress as women around the world. And, I know we're getting ready to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Beijing. But the fact is, there are too many women around the world that still lack voice and choice, unable to contribute to the decisions which impact their lives. These could be very simple choices about, what to wear, what to eat, when to eat, how they can leave their homes and with whom they can leave their homes, let alone the issues around choices around education and work and children and money and even sex. Those choices are still out of reach for so many women around the world. And for me, the global pandemic here has really exacerbated and underscored the issues for women around the world. And not just in countries in the developing world, but right here at home in the United States. And I was reading a statistic the other day that 50,000 young girls in Kenya have been raped since the pandemic started. 50,000 school-age girls have been raped since the pandemic started. And when I wrote that article for the Council on Foreign Relations, we talk about this health pandemic, but we do have a pandemic of violence against women. And there should be, to me, a level of outrage about that. So the global pandemic is really something that I think has exacerbated these issues. It's why I believe so strongly that when it comes to setting the global development agenda, we should be talking about violence against women, women's personal and economic security, and of course, women's education. And I do believe that on today's Women's Equality Day, with Beijing coming up, as well as the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote, that this is an important time to have this conversation.
Wow, 50,000 women. That's certainly not written about enough. or that story isn't being told. Um, so, a lot of your book, as you mentioned, is about your longer stay in Rwanda. You've been to Rwanda in and out in your whole life. Can you talk a little bit about how this particular stay changed your perspective on women's empowerment and how to address women's empowerment?
Sure. You know, it's interesting because I was thinking about this. You know, in writing the book, it didn't so much change my perception as much as crystallize it. And what I had thought about through all my work, working with women throughout the developing world and in countries in transition is, you know, there are two things that I've seen that make a fundamental difference in the lives of women and girls really everywhere. The first is an education, and the second is women's ability to earn an income. I actually think the two must go hand in hand, and that in fact, education alone is insufficient to change the status quo for women and girls. But when you have access to knowledge, which is the education piece, and access to resources, the economic piece, that you really can see lasting change for women. And I've witnessed this over and over again. You know, we could talk about from Afghanistan to Malawi to Rwanda. I've witnessed it here in the United States where education and income make a fundamental difference in their lives, and it gives women the chance to have voice and choice. And particularly, you know, for women, choices around how money is saved and spent, choices around sending and keeping their children, particularly their daughters, in school, choices, you know, when a woman is suffering from violence and abuse in the family. And Rwanda, for me, just, I came to really understand how much women at their core have in common, really regardless of place or circumstance. This shared desire to be treated with decency and respect, to support and educate our children, to live a life free of violence, abuse, and harassment, and in peace and with dignity, really. What separates us really is choice, the ability to choose from the, you know, from the simplest expression of our daily preferences to the more profound life-changing choices that shape us as women and mothers and human beings.
Yes. In your book, you highlight the many women that you have worked with across your career. And you have been so gracious to bring some of them into this conversation today. So, with this, I really want to thank Dr. Joyce Banda, the former president of Malawi, for joining us, and ask you, you know, how did you come to be involved in this issue? And where are you today? How has your thinking evolved as you've worked on this issue over time, as president, as, you know, civil rights leader, as where you are
Yeah,
today?
it's difficult to talk after Karen. I mean, she's more African than most African women that I know. She knows, she articulated the things, the issues very well. But so I think what I'll do to enrich this conversation will be to add on my personal experience. And I'm hoping that that's what you all want to hear. Um, in answering your question, I think first I should say that my life experience of 40 years has taught me now, with evidence, research, that leaders are born. And that I believe truly that I was born a leader. And they say, research says that they are only born with 30%, only 30% leadership traits. And that 70% has to be added on by society. And in our case in Africa, that is a very big issue because it all depends on where you are born as an African girl child. So for me, I've been very fortunate that the 4 areas that I have championed in my life, all of them originated from personal experience. I was 14 years old when I realized that my best friend in the village I was growing up in town, privileged because my father worked. But Chris, my best friend, was brighter than me, who Karen has had an opportunity to meet, was growing up in the village. And we went all the way to the end of primary education. And we were selected to the best girls' high schools in Malawi. And my best friend, Chris, went for one term and was not able to go back because the family couldn't raise the $6 that she required to go back. And I woke up at age 14 to the injustice of this world. As it turns out now, 39 million African girls are not in school through no fault of their own. And this is being worsened now by COVID-19. 130 worldwide. It's unfair and it's unjust. And I made up my mind at age 14 that I would grow up and send as many girls as possible to school. And Karen and me were able to visit some of my schools and saw what I have been able to do. So in my country, I have been able to send 6,500 girls to school. And I have also sent 1,500 colleges for tertiary education, out of which 30 women are medical doctors in my country. The second is maternal mortality. Maternal mortality is something that happened for me as an issue accidentally. I didn't know in 1984, when I went to give birth to my fourth born child, that 1,200 women were dying giving life. Were dying giving birth in my country alone, out of 100,000 live births. I went to give birth to my firstborn child on 23rd of January 1984 and suffered what they call postpartum hemorrhage. I was bleeding to death. Thank God my husband had a friend who was a gynecologist. He went, took him over, brought him over, and saved my life. And I woke up and I started to look at the statistics. And I made up my mind from that day that I would spend my life fighting this unnecessary death of women, giving life. Why is it that in America, you become pregnant, in Europe, you become pregnant, it's a time of joy, it's a time of expectation. You're waiting for a baby, and you begin to prepare. Where I come from, it's a time of anxiety. You don't know whether when you go, you come back. No ambulances, no proper hospitals, no trained personnel, hospitals far apart. And when I almost died, even as a wife of a judge as I was, I began to ask questions about what about the rest of the women that are not as privileged as myself. So that became another issue. And I'm proud to report that all fast forward, when I was head of state, it is something that I focused on very seriously indeed, and was able to reduce maternal death in my country by 32%. Not that it's anything to be proud of, that we went from 675 women to 460, and that 460 are still dying, but at least we made progress, and now I know how to do it to make sure that we eradicate this unnecessary death. Women shouldn't die giving life. The third one is violence against women. By age 21, I was married. By age 25, I had 3 children. And spent 10 years in an abusive marriage. And then growing up as an African woman, where staying married is what you should do as a good woman born in Africa, well brought up. You can't leave, no matter what kind of abuse you're going through. But I said, well, no, I'm going to walk out. And I decided to walk out for the sake of my 3 children who were locked up in this toxic environment with a father who was an alcoholic. I packed my bags and I left. And I realized at that point that as long as women are not economically empowered, as Karen earlier said, and cannot make contribution towards the household economically, women shall continue to suffer. And so I took upon myself that day. I made a decision in 1990 by forming the first organization called the National Association of Business Women in Malawi. So by 1997, we had reached 50,000 women, rural women, disadvantaged women, who for the first time became economically empowered, and the research and the fact-finding impact study funded by USAID found that 73% of the women we worked with graduated from poverty forever. And 84% of the women locked up in such households, after the support that we provided, earned respect at household level. And that the families enjoyed good health, and they enjoyed education opportunities. Because when a woman makes money and brings money into the household enjoys better nutrition, better health, and she can afford to send her girl child to school. But more importantly, as Karen said, they begin to share in the decision-making processes at household level. She can begin to make choices about her own life at household level. And so in 1997, that is why the Hunger Project of New York recognized my work and gave me the Africa Prize for Leadership for the sustainable end of hunger. What saddens me is that now with COVID-19, here we are helplessly watching, with all the work we are putting into this, watching gender-based violence get worse, watching girls getting married. In Malawi alone, in the last 2 months, in one district, 15,000 women have become pregnant. 15,000 girls have become pregnant in Mangocha alone. And we are watching South Africa, 6 women die every day through gender-based violence. So we are saying, well, we know what we need to do. Sometimes we're just overwhelmed because we don't get the opportunity to get on the partnerships that we need to fight on. But my feeling is that we need to be raising our voices as women leaders, form networks, raise our voices, name and shame, engage the leaders of our countries to make sure that we fight gender-based violence. But then as an achievement on my part, when I was elected to go to Parliament in 2004, I championed the passing of the domestic violence bill. So when we get into leadership, we get an opportunity to change some of these laws that negatively impact women and children. And the last one is leadership. And leadership for me, I was 8 years old when my uncle was telling my dad in my presence, I don't know what I see in this child, but this child shall be great. And so I agree with the article that was written by The Atlantic in 2016 with the Ellen Seliff on front page that said what women leaders have in common. And they said that when they interviewed women in China, in UAE, in Africa, one thing that women leaders have in common is the role their father played when they were growing up. And I do seriously agree, because this particular day when my father was talking with his friend, although he laughed, what can she do? But the friend said, no, I don't know, but this child is special. He reminded me throughout my growing up that remember what my friend said, you were destined to be great. But I live in a continent where fathers don't usually interact with their daughters. And it's not out of spite or abuse, it is tradition. The girl child grows with the mother, the boy child grows with the father. These are the issues now we are taking up as African women leaders to change, because it's very, very critical and it's very, very important. And the last one is leadership. I have had that opportunity to be a leader at every stage of the way, either outside parliament, in public office, in the civil society. And I have found that by raising my voice, I've brought about change. By being a politician, I've brought about change, and even by being a president, I have brought about change. So that's how I got to where I am.
Wow. Well, thank God for your father, and thank God for you.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you are a mentor to so many women across the continent. And let me ask you, I mean, I think there are many donors out here in the world who want to support women's empowerment and support women to have voice, but there's a lot of cultural sensitivity about engaging in another culture, crossing cultural boundaries. What is your advice to those donors who want to support girls, women, but not offend? I mean, especially now, given
Yeah,
what's going on.
I think what I would want everybody to know is that in my work alone, we have reached 1.3 million Malawians. And here, where I come from, there are so many Joyce Bandas. And I know that I have made that kind of, there's that kind of achievement, those kind of statistics to show that 1.3 million Malawians have been impacted by the work of Joyce Band. But it is because there were partners that worked with me. It is because USID was there to support me. It is because of this organization and that organization, Aquila, and all those organizations that came to on my side and worked with me and worked with me. So what I always ask for is the forging of partnerships. I want us to understand that if being African or even being uneducated does not mean that you're stupid. You, Africans know what to do to get to the next level. All they require is partnership. And so forging smart partnerships between our sisters and brothers from the West, we find that by working together, we yield more. And so right now, what I'm thinking, the best that the West can do is to listen to what we are saying. We are saying right now, it is education, it is gender-based violence, and it is women's empowerment. And for me, to my fellow African women, it is the networks. We must get together and we must raise our voices. We must speak together and we must shout and we must name and shame. Right now, I don't know how many initiatives I am involved in, but we have formed what we are calling the African Women Leaders Network at the African Union and UN Women. And we believe that in an international, intergenerational setup where younger women and women of my age can work together and focus on issues that are standing in the way of the girl child, of the woman in Africa. But for donors, they must understand listen and work together with us because we know exactly what to do. On my part, I've written a book that I'm calling From Day One, and the title From Day One. And I am saying, with all good intentions, the Western world has come into Africa and all the developing world to assist us and focused most on the adolescent girl child. And my argument is that that is too late. By the time you focus on the girl child at 13 years old, there's already so much harm that has happened to this girl child. And so because I've lived it, I mean, she eats less, she eats less at least with the mother, she's overworked, she's denied education, there's discrimination, she is defiled. By age 7, 8, she is she's mutilated, she is initiated. In Malawi, she's cleansed. If it is Egypt, she's FGM. So by the time she's 13, and there's all those resources coming into Africa to support the adolescent girl child, it's too late, I'm afraid. So that's what we are saying. Can somebody listen to us? This girl child must be protected from 0 to 10, and this girl child must be supported, must go to school. That is my opinion. And we women must have an opportunity to contribute towards the income of the household. And women should not die giving life, goodness sake. And so women should also participate in leadership, and the women themselves must push. I have told women to say, in as far as participating in leadership is concerned, you can help us raise your voices, but Africa is doing even better than America sometimes in having women participate in leadership. So it's a challenge that we all have. So for me, the solution to that is that all women, America, Europe, Africa, is to form networks and to raise our voices together and to push together. And that it is not possible for us to copy and paste what your model from America. I'm talking about feminism. It is us using our own, whatever works here in Africa.
Thank you for that. We know that you have to leave a little earlier So we decided we would open the floor at this point to questions, and I see that there are two in the chat. Linda, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. Joyce, I'm a feminist activist living in Nova Scotia, Canada. And I've been working for 27 years with women globally who talk about being tortured by their parents, by their spouses, by human traffickers. And it's still an invisible crime. Most women are not recognized as enduring torture. They only think of it as state torture. And I was wondering how often you hear of stories of torture in the work that you do, that women and girls endure.
Well, for me, this year alone is worse than ever before, particularly what we are seeing in South Africa. But in as far as trafficking is concerned, when I was appointed Minister of Women and Children in 2004, I was alerted by the American Embassy here in Malawi that we were on a tier 2 watch list, which means we were very bad in child trafficking. And so I started working on that to reduce it because it was going to affect the support that we were getting from the American government. And I'm glad that by the time I I was promoted to become a foreign minister, we had improved to that. But what is now breaking our heart, what is of concern to us now, is the way the modern day slavery. Our girls that are being taken from Africa to go into Asia to work as housemaids under a system that is called kafala, where they are actually a property of that household. They are beaten, they are abused, they are killed. This is what we are fighting this month. In fact, we have taken that matter. A friend of mine from Ghana has just written a book, which is I can send the name of the book later, but it is a bestseller on Amazon right now. And she is calling upon African leaders to ensure that we protect our girls from going and being abused that way. But we also come from traditions where women being abused should be accepted. That is what we are brought up to believe. Now that in a patriarchal society has been abused by the men, believing that we can just sit back and tolerate. But even as we were growing up, yes, our husbands abused us, beat us up, but they didn't kill us. Now we are actually dying. So it is worse now. And so it is, when I was the Minister of Gender, I championed the passing of the Domestic Violence Bill, which gives the woman the tools that she requires to protect herself. But we also growing up, we live in a society where women will not want to reveal, will not want to report their husbands, will not want the husbands arrested because of their livelihood. So they will be tortured, but they will keep quiet. So with all those tools at their disposal, they still continue to suffer.
Thank you.
Karen, I think you're, Karen Lambert, I know you had a question in the chat. Should I read it? Are you there? I can't see it. Oh boy, the chat just...
How do you see the value of building networks at the section of women's leadership? Yeah,
go ahead.
Is it the question about networks?
She says, hoping she can speak about the idea of inclusivity of women in the political world, either formally or as civil society organizations. We are seeing progress in the normative frameworks relating to women, peace, and security, but less practice on the ground. I think she's speaking about involvement of women in peace processes. I know that there are some women, but not enough by any means. And given that women play such a big role in bringing up issues that men don't.
Women are peacemakers, and women can also be very good peacekeepers. but we are denied the opportunity to get involved. And we have been calling upon the United Nations to involve women and to include women. After all, we are the ones who emotionally are able to sit down with in a conflict and bring people down and sit people down and mediate. But we are not given an opportunity. It is across the board. As far as I'm concerned, not enough women are participating in peace building and peacekeeping, and women are not participating in conflict, but women are not also participating in the whole spectrum of leadership. So I believe that even in having women in parliament, going to parliament, just getting elected to get into parliament, the only way I was able to pass the domestic violence bill is because we were 27 women in a parliament of 193. So we were able to lobby our male counterparts to pass that law. So when women are not present, when women are not participating, then we cannot expect to bring about change. We cannot expect to bring about peace. So the first for me is to form networks to support as many women as possible get into leadership. And what breaks my heart is in 2020, even America is not doing as well as Africa is doing. So, I mean, we are all in this together. Because, I mean, why is it that 200 years later, America hasn't had a female president? Africa has had 5. And why is it that Africa is the continent with the highest number of women in parliament? 63% for Rwanda, the highest in the world, because that is where we pass laws. That's where we should be. If we are going to change the status of women in the world, it is women must participate in leadership. Women must be sitting at the decision making table. And if we are not there, then we shall remain on the menu. Am I muted?
No, I think Ina was frozen.
Ah, okay.
Ina, you're muted right now.
I am?
No, Ina, you're muted.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my computer is going a little crazy. So thank you for your answer. I think we should turn to Najla just because she has been waiting patiently. And actually, some of these questions are very relevant to her. Najla, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and your work? I mean, you have done a lot on specifically this issue of violence against women.
Thank you so much, and it's really nice to be at the panel that with the women that have a lot of achievements. And thank you, Dr. Joyce, for sharing all of your experience, and Karen too. So actually, before going to the work to my work, what we are doing. I would like to bring the issues that you already discussed, particularly the education and the economic empowerment of women is key for being for having voice. For me, being a first female judge in my province was one of the moments in my life that I could see within the justice sector injustice, because the women and men were treated differently, and the laws even were applied differently on women and men. So that's why one of the reasons that I'm in this work, looking, particularly those days, I had no, I really support what Dr. Joyce said about the coalition building, networking with women. And in those days, I felt so helpless and so voiceless, because I was the only one to fight with the entire court, basically, while we were applying legal issues or applying enforcing the laws. So one of the reasons that I started to basically be in this work and do a lot, because I got so much opportunities to particularly to build the foundation for women. Constitution of Afghanistan was one of them that I was part of it. Elimination of violence against women was another. And particularly when it comes to the voice, because you have to have the foundation and then build on the foundation and make it happen. So one of the work that we do at Every Woman Treaty is we are working towards having every woman international treaty that it will end violence against women. This is what we think that this is, as Joyce mentioned and Karen mentioned, that this is a pandemic. Particularly now, this is pandemic within pandemic, that we have to really address this and make sure that we are together and strongly apply those, come together and raise our voices and particularly fill the international system gaps on the particularly legal frameworks on the international level. So what we do, particularly the strategies that we use, we look at the basically the gaps at the national level, international level, which that's why we come up with the idea of having a Every Woman International Treaty, because in 75% of international treaties are not addressing women's issues. So this is one of the reasons that we thought this is our goal, to have a Every Woman treaty on ending violence against women. So the strategies we used, particularly, we are looking at the gaps at the national level. Of course, international is definitely there, but national level, and also looking how we can reform those national laws, and particularly how this can happen. Of course, when you reform the laws, definitely the health sector, justice sector, security sector, and service sectors also have to be reformed. By what we do, we are trying to provide a training for those sectors, of course, through the building coalition, working in investing on frontline activists on the ground to identify the problems, particularly identify the policy problems, the policy gaps, and then work together, investing on them to enhance their capacity to raise their voices, and as well as address those issues. And at the same time, we are also working on how to conduct and implement prevention education campaigns that Dr. Joyce already mentioned, that how many women are dying every day by, by not even, even not knowing what is happening out there and what is out there, basically. So, and at the same time, we are also working to establish this coalition and bring the voices of these women and bridge the gap between the national laws and international laws. Because at the international laws, because unfortunately, international laws don't have a direct implementation frameworks or implementation mechanisms in place. Like, for instance, 1325, most of the countries are reporting each year, they are doing a review report, or shadow reports by civil society, but unfortunately, none of those issues been really directly addressed. So one of the reasons that we are going to establish this mechanism in place and give the voice for women who are working every day on the ground, and basically working on ending violence against women. And of course, another point, another way that we are also working to collect the data and see how we can put monitoring in evaluation mechanisms of impact of these implementation of these laws on the ground. So this is what we do, and particularly we are working, we are building towards 1,000 voices of women to have by 2025, sorry, to have the 1,000 women are working in these particular issues and raising these issues at the international level, and asking for nations or head of states to make them accountable. on particularly ending violence against women and addressing violence against women.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that. How can people get involved?
So this is actually, we have the coalition of 1,700 organizations, 800 plus individuals, 1,700 individuals and 800 plus individuals, as well as 250 active members of our group that we are working 128 countries. We have women activists from all of these places coming together, and we are working together on different policies, on partnership policies, diplomacy, different campaigns. Just we finished on June, we had a Red Shoes campaign. We joined a cause for a woman that she was killed by her partner. So people can, we have a system that the people can join us by requesting of, first of all, the membership, and second, we also accept or appreciate the involvement of funding some of these activities that we are doing, particularly when it comes to the raising the voices of the women from the grassroots level to the international level, and vice versa, because we have to connect the dots between the international mechanism, legal mechanism, and also national mechanism.
So my next question is really for all of you. Maybe we'll start with you, Karen, to bring you back into the conversation. Really, you know, in this country, a lot of us have spent the summer thinking about issues of race and equity and how we can solve this issue or address it in this country. What would you say are lessons from women's empowerment for how to approach better equity and support marginalized voices in gaining access and power?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ina. And also just thank you to my colleagues, Dr. Joyce, Banda, and Najla, for their excellent comments. I concur strongly with a lot of the conversation that's happened. I was thinking about this too, and you know, my experience has been that this is played out both internationally as well as domestically, which is that I believe economic empowerment drives social empowerment. So it's the key factor. It's some of the things that Joyce has said about, you know, when women have an income, they have more decision-making power in the family, they have more status in the community. And so I think when you have the economic piece driving the social change piece, it does make a difference. And I don't, it's not that it can't work the other way, but that some of my experience has really taught me that. And so what I have seen, some of the opportunities for women globally that might apply here in the United States are a couple of things. That we need to start thinking about retraining and upskilling women for the future workforce. I think that global education is, and education in this country, quite frankly, is woefully out to date. And so if we're really thinking about preparing women for economic participation, whether that means 21st century skills, digital literacy skills, market relevant skills that leads to the jobs of the future, we need to begin that now. And I agree with Joyce, you know, waiting till tertiary education is just a little bit too late, although equally important for a reason I'll mention later. But certainly sooner is better, and particularly on the digital literacy side. I also think, and this is across the board globally as well as in the United States, women are still the largest source of unpaid labor anywhere. Every single country, including here in the United States, which limits women's ability to engage in paid work, but it also limits their empowerment and agency. And so giving women the tools to have the social protections, to participate in paid work, which means engaging men in this process and boys from the very beginning. As Joyce said, you know, when women are raised, it's women who are having to stay home, take care of their younger siblings, do the housework, work in the fields while the boys might go off to school. We need to deal with the unpaid labor issue from the very beginning and inculcate that in boys and in men and in women themselves to have different expectations. And I think what we've seen with COVID, as well as globally and here in the United States, is women are still making up, you know, in the largest sector in formal work. And informal work tends to mean fewer social protections. They're the first to be laid off. They have the least job security, and their wages tend to be more flexible. So dealing with the formal and informal work balance is going to be really important, I think, across the board. And we know that this affects women of color in particular here in the United States, where 2/3 of the minimum age workforce are women. And then finally, I think the violence against women issue. You've heard from Dr. Banda, you've also heard from Najla how much of an issue that is. It's very hard to talk about women's voices and women's empowerment when women are being beaten in their homes and suffer from intimate partner violence. And so until we can address in a systemic way the violence against women issue, domestic violence, sexual-based violence, intimate partner violence, and have repercussions against same, it's very hard to talk about women's empowerment in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think to add on to what Karen said, I am particularly concerned about where we find ourselves with the pandemic in our midst. I would like to recommend that whatever support the world wants to give is to pay attention what is happening, particularly in poor communities. To start with, families are not controlled. Families are large families. And I've always said that as long as the children are looked upon as wealth, children will continue to be born. When we empower women, when we empower families, the first thing they stop doing is having babies. So the economic empowerment of women graduates women to social and political empowerment. It is only a woman who has got financial resources who will stand for election. But coming back to COVID-19, I have spent my entire adult life economically empowering women and educating the girl child. All the schools that Karen visited when she came, we have closed because of the restrictions. So the children are not going to school anymore. In a country where, in America, in Europe, a child by age 4, they are playing on the computer. We live in societies where a girl child, a boy child will go all the way to high school without touching a computer. So we have no means, we have no ability to provide online education to these children. They don't even have the digits. We can't purchase the gadgets and teach, and therefore we can't, there are no operational costs, the teachers cannot teach. So we are at a standstill. So children have not gone to school for 8 months. And during that 8 months, there's no homeschooling. And during that 8 months, they're becoming pregnant and getting married at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That for me, that's a pandemic. That is my worry now. That is what I've spent my life doing, and I sit back and watch all that break apart. I didn't realize, now that we know that to fight the pandemic, it's hygiene, it is social distancing, and it is masking. All those are beyond the reach of most ordinary villagers that we work with. Yesterday, I spent the day, I don't know, Karen, if I sent you the clip, I spent the day wildly walking in the villages, distributing masks, because now here it's law. If you don't have a mask, you pay $2, and $2 is beyond the reach of most villagers. So I'm making them, manufacturing them, and giving them out free. I mean, this is something we didn't have to deal with. But then again, in most villages, they don't have clean water. So now I have taken on the provision of clean water. Tomorrow I'm traveling to a very remote area because somebody has donated 4 boreholes that I will drill there so that people can wash their hands. Things that we take for granted. Distributing pails and distributing soap and distributing food to families. That's what the pandemic has done. All the progress that we made, we find ourselves going backwards. But so my hope is that working together, because even those countries that gave us support, they too are struggling because of the recession all over the world. But we are hoping that within our limited resources, we can forge those smart partnerships I talked about earlier. And we can continue to do the little that we can during this pandemic, particularly the teen marriages and particularly the early pregnancies, and to stop that, the children must go to school. And for them to go to school, we must find ways of providing online learning. And for us, the domestic violence issue is that those of us who are at my level must continue to raise our voices, name and shame, and form networks to fight gender-based violence. And I found that where it works better is when we recruit men as well into our networks. So it's not just women complaining and women screaming, it's men and women working together. And it's working better in South Africa. They have started networks where it's both men and women, and more men than women, speaking about their fellow men and the gender-based violence. So forming networks, working with men, finding ways of providing, being innovative in providing education to our children who are not going to school now.
Thank you, Najla.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the issues Karen and Dr. Joyce brought up, these are really the important issues for us also, because we are directly working on ending violence against women, which is very important. And for us, instead of individual voice, as Dr. Joyce mentioned also, that having a collective voice and working with more women at the front line and bringing more data and evidences just to make sure that you're making a case, a real case, and how people are living on those circumstances. So those are for me, it is important, and particularly when it comes to the addressing those issues, particularly now. I think this is the time for us to look at the international legal frameworks and legal mechanisms to see where is the gap, which we already found that gap, and how we can apply or address those issues at the international level, and make the states, the head of the states in each country on the earth, to be responsible and to take action, and at the same time be accountable for what is happening on the ground. Because for instance, even in the United States, I'm living here, so can you imagine, no one was ready for this pandemic, but this is also, again, when it comes to the women's issues, people are, I hear a lot here that what is happening on women's life, particularly on the communities like African American communities and other communities, Asian communities, Middle Eastern communities. What is happening even here in the United States? As Joyce mentioned, how we can mobilize ourselves, how we can get together, how we can come together and make our voices heard as a woman, because in most of these crises, women and men, of course, men definitely, but women and children are getting more affected by any sort of crisis, whether this is disaster, this is health crisis, this is disaster crisis, or this is conflict, or this is any sort of other type of disaster. I think the important part is to, now is the time to bring the attention of the global attention to this particular pandemic, which is violence against women.
So Joyce, you have been president. What is most helpful to make it possible for you to act? on some of these issues? What from, like if we are to raise our voices and bring this to the attention of our leaders, what can we do to help our leaders act?
I think it's political will. I have found that the position of president is a very powerful position, but it is what you are prepared to do for the people that you serve. I've always told Karen that leadership is a love affair. You must fall in love with the people you serve, and the people must fall in love with you. But so many people go into these positions for the power. And those of you who go to serve, what we must do now is to acknowledge that we, as leaders, is to acknowledge that we have a problem on our hands. Leaders must realize that there's domestic violence and it's real. And me as a leader, I'm going to do something about it. But here in Africa, fortunately, we have organized ourselves. What we need is those smart partnerships that I talked about, for us to be able to mobilize ourselves and to raise our voices, because we can go to African Union. African Union has a heads of state summit twice a year. So for us is to organize ourselves and go and confront them and plead with them to ensure that they too in their countries are doing something. Right now, we have sent a petition to African Union for all heads of states to refuse to sign off our girls to go and work in Asia under the kafala system. So we have a platform already. We have a place already. We just need to work together. Women from across cultures, from across nations, make it big the way we made it in 1995 when we went to Beijing. Once more, we must rise together, because we shook the world that time because of the solidarity that we demonstrated. As we celebrate 25 years now, it is not the leaders who must act. It is us people who must act to make them realize that power has shifted. In the recent weeks, people have asked me in the numerous Zoom conferences, what lesson can we learn from Malawi? A whole election that was conducted in 2019 was nullified a year later because the president had rigged the election. It is ordinary people who decided, no, we are going to challenge, we are going to court. The elections were nullified, and a re-election was conducted, and won the election. So the power has shifted into the hands of the people. And if any leader doesn't see that, I feel sorry for them. They're being stubborn at their own peril, because they will sit in the State House and just discover that the power is emerging from the marketplace, from all networks, and bring them down. So what I've been saying to African leaders, listen to what the people are saying. Women are dying. So it is incumbent upon all leaders to stand up and take action. But it is, because I always say it's about political will. When I got into State House, the first thing I did was to decide to take advantage of that position to appoint fellow women to positions of leadership. So they're here and they're qualified. So it's on merit. It wasn't even any favor. For the first time, this country had a female chief justice, and head of government service, a woman. Solicitor General, a woman. Deputy Governors of Reserve Bank. Inspector General of Police. 100 appointments. I did that because I knew that in order for us to move the status of women, women must be sitting at the table. There will be nothing about us without us. So we must also participate in decision making. So when you ask me what can leaders do, leaders, whether they like it or not, this time they must act. And they will only act when we rise, when we stand up, in solidarity like we did in 1995 when we went to Beijing.
That's a very good reminder. We've got to start mobilizing for Beijing again, or Beijing 2. I don't actually know. Will it be in Beijing again? So I want to open up the floor, and I also want to recognize Monica. You had a question that, because my computer froze, got lost. Do you want to ask it now?
Ina, thank you. And I'm excited to join the webinar today. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege to chair a board for an organization that is US-based, but called Rwanda Youth Partnership, that focuses on a youth organization in Rwanda. And also my daytime job is with Youthville International, managing global partnerships there. So working with young people who are disconnected in all the ways you can imagine. So one of the persistent questions I have, I think this, Najla or Dr. Banda or Karen, glad to hear from any of you on this, is how do we balance out effort and resources? We've talked a lot about interventions, and we've also talked about the need to change cultural norms and practices. There's work to be done in both camps. And of course, to some extent, we have to focus in the areas where we have the greatest leverage. So Karen, your mention about upskilling, Dr. Banda, your focus on education, and I think for all of you building networks, but those are symptoms of a much deeper problem about the inherent value of women and girls. Held by boys and men, and also, in some cases, embraced, unfortunately, by girls and women, right, through upbringing and just cultural norms. So I wonder how you think about balancing out the efforts between intervention and re-education or revisiting cultural norms and practices in a way that that still honors, particularly for those who are coming from outside of a particular culture, that still honors cultural norms and practices.
Maybe I'll take a, go ahead, please.
No, because I will be exiting, so I thought I could answer that. As I've said before, each continent, Africans, Asians, Americans, Europeans, we must have our own model. Cut and paste will not work. I have found that if we raise our voices the way maybe American women will raise their voices, if we confront the men that are holding the key, if we shout, it doesn't work. So I have always said to us as African women, let us have our own type of feminism. Our own will be to engage. That's why I keep talking about, let's go to African Union, let's talk to them, our own will be to engage, to talk to them, and because that's what works in Africa. And somebody told me, I was attending an event in America at the African Union office, and a lady from Nigeria asked me, when I go to Nigeria, I tell my peers there to say, let's raise our voices. It's time for us to fight. It's time for our rights and equality. But then they don't listen to me telling me. And I said, well, where is that coming from? Because when they told you that in Africa, it's because they know it can't work in Africa. So if that is what you are learning here in America, leave it here. Because that back home, it won't work. It won't work because we have presidents here now, one after another, appointing 50% of their cabinet women ministers. Even African Union is half-half. Even Rwanda is 63%. And 5 presidents, we didn't shout. We had our own way of negotiating and finding our way to the table, using what we were told how to do best, and that's to negotiate as African women, get to the table and find our way there and find our seats there. But that might not work in America. In America, maybe it would need to organize, to march, to scream, to shout, to go to the House of Representatives, to raise their voices. Maybe that can work in America. So to go back to the question that you asked, madam, it is across cultures, but then we must also look at where we are coming from and what best work for us in that particular part of this world. I don't even know if I'm answering that question.
Yes, yes, thank you. I appreciate it. It's very
Yeah.
helpful. It's a good
All right,
reminder.
Najla, did you have something to add?
Actually, I think some of the issues that first of all, the women's issues always underfunded. Whatever intervention we are looking at, unfortunately, with the women's issues, and I agree with Dr. Joyce that in different cultures, like for instance, if we use the gender terminology, like for instance in Afghanistan, people will
Yeah.
see that, okay, this is a Western idea. Or if
Mm.
they see I'm not wearing the scarf, they see, okay, she is a spy from United States or a spy from Western world. I mean, I agree that the intervention should be adoptable at the regional level, and even particularly going back to each nations, because each nation they have, or each country they have their own particular cultural issues that they are accepting. And I think what I'm saying, using the right language in most of the cases, and while we are intervening in these circumstances will be the key. And second, I think how we can mobilize to address these issues, particularly like, for instance, I will bring one of the example from Afghanistan, that the hotline, which we call it, this was for violence against women, they were reporting the hotline. This was closed already and was allocated or was put for the pandemic issues. And if it was a main issue, I mean, there are so many money coming to the country, but unfortunately, because this is only women's issues, that's why they have to put it somewhere else. They have to reallocating those issues. So one of my points is that how we can make sure to have funding or maybe budget allocation for these sort of issues while we are doing the intervention.
And I just wanted to add this from an American perspective, because I get asked this all the time. I think, as somebody who's been doing international development for about 30 years and working across multiple continents and cultures, it's always a challenge to know how best to intervene, and you don't want to overstep or understep. But you also, I think there is still a role for international development, and particularly in terms of really encouraging, supporting, advocating for policies that are locally driven, that help to put local solutions forward. And I think, I have seen international development done poorly, where you get Americans coming into a country and they saying, I know best. It's sort of the more pedantic approach to development. And I agree with Joyce, it doesn't work. It's the same way that if I was to go into Rwanda or Malawi and say, your feminism needs to look like that. Why aren't you women doing this? I don't think there's a place for that in development, and certainly development the way it should be done to create lasting change. But it is so important to encourage and support both frontline activists and local institutions, whether they're providing education, whether they're doing economic development, whether they're working on violence against women, to make sure that they have the tools, the resources to be able to make that change happen. And what I find, to Najla's point, there is very little money going to women and girls, and very little money going in general to integrated approaches to development. I think donors tend to come in and say, I want to do this one thing, or I want to do this thing, and I want to see quick results, and I want to see it in the next 2 years. But we all know that systemic change takes time. Norm change takes time. And so I think about thinking through in terms of, longer term visions and longer term strategies with your philanthropic efforts that can really help to support and drive systemic change at the local level. That can do a lot to help move women and girls forward in each country.
Yeah.
All right, I see a lot of questions. There was one from Emily Nielsen Jones. I don't know if you're still on or not. Are you?
Yes. Yes, I am. Um, so first of all, this is just an amazing conversation. You've covered so many bases, and this is an important day in the U.S. as we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. So I'm glad I joined in. I always am wondering about how religion interacts with like women's economic empowerment and educating girls, because I've seen many efforts around the world where everyone is working towards that. Even women and men who are on board with women's empowerment, but there's still these religious views that are hard to address that are really the root of the problem, that even in marriage, it isn't seen as an equal relationship. But it's hard to go there, but wondering how you see efforts around religion in your work.
Religion.
Who wants to take that? Najla?
Okay, yeah, sure. Actually, yeah, I was going to, because for me, experiencing being ruled by Taliban for 5 years and being a judge, a powerful position anywhere in the world, particularly in a conservative society like Afghanistan, it was so difficult to just sit at home for 5 years and not be able to go outside even. I was, believe me, I'm sure you will not, people will not believe that I was renting my neighbor little son to go outside, to take her with me outside, and then be able to go outside and buy something which I really needed. So that's the religion. Unfortunately, I had higher education, I had a powerful position, but because the religion in it was so extreme type of it, that I had to be sitting at home for 5 years. On that period, I could have my PhD done, or I could have lots of cases done, violence against women cases done in my court. So this is a very crucial point. But we also have to, again, I wanted to bring another example, particularly yesterday, one of our a police officer. She's actress. She's police officer. She's very successful woman. She was there was attempt for assassination of her. She was attacked at the middle of city in Kabul. So that's why one of the issues that again I'm bringing here, that how the international, I'm just coming back to the international legal frameworks, because unfortunately none of these legal frameworks are addressing even how to work with this, how to overcome of these religious extremism ideas. It's not only Islamic ideas. There is Buddhism, there is Christianity, there is Hinduism. Everyone has just become so extremist. So in my opinion, what I have done in my previous involvement in different development programs back in Afghanistan, we were working really closely with religious scholars on women's issues. What I'm calling it, I hope I will not offend anybody, but I was always thinking to use their weapon and use it against them. Just use the same weapon that you're using against us. And then what we were doing, lots of work on bringing the women's rights from Islamic perspective, and then teaching religious scholars, not only the communities in the society, but also the religious scholars, that at least that they should know, okay, these are the verses from Quran, and why you disagree with this. I mean, engaging in working with those class, using the right terminology, as I mentioned earlier, the right language and the right terminology will definitely have a huge impact. So that's my answer.
Karen, did you want to add, or shall I go to the next question?
No, I thought Najla answered that perfectly. Don't have
All
anything
right,
to
I
add.
think I'm going to go to Dr. Karen Martin. Do you want to ask your question directly? You're on mute.
I'm a pediatrician and I'm the founder and director of an organization called ASHA that works in the slums in Delhi. And I've been working in these slums now for 32 years. And I've encountered all the different problems that have been discussed today at the grassroots among 700,000 people that I serve. So I've been seen domestic violence, I've seen maternal mortality, very high, you know, and the women in the slums are at the margins and completely disempowered and do not have a voice at the individual level or at the community level or at a political level or national level. Particularly the women from the slums. And I have very effectively used the tool of nonviolence and active peacemaking. And Satyagraha was, of course, something that Mahatma Gandhi championed. By that he meant insistence upon the truth, very firm insistence upon the truth without becoming confrontational and violent. And then winning over your opponents. He didn't use the term enemies, he just used the term opponents. And he said winning them over through persuasion and through trying to understand the lens with which they view the world and then helping them to understand the lens with which the other sex views the world and so on. So it's a huge concept, of course, but I wondered if there was any experience that any of the wonderful speakers have had in this regard and whether this type of ideology has helped them to be able to challenge and also address the inequalities that we see among women.
I'll let you go first, Najla.
So actually, I did not get the core question. Would you mind repeating it, please?
I was just asking whether the philosophy of nonviolence, of active peacemaking, of insistence upon the truth without becoming confrontational and aggressive is a philosophy that has worked.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so actually, there are so many examples that I have been practicing, but part of our work even now at the Every Woman Treaty is to work with the particularly very strategically and carefully working with the frontline activists on the ground in 128 countries and enhance their capacities to address the issues, the policies, and the legislation that they are discriminatory or they're not really addressing the issues. Like one of the strategies to do more advocacy work, because this is something that you don't go and fight with people, you just go, and also giving them the skills of negotiation, how they can negotiate stuff, you know, that's also something that, then also how to be confident and how to be knowledgeable on the issues that they are really addressing. Be kind of, we call it, you know, just, we call it drumbeat, you know, how they could just go and bring the issue, and then when it comes to the time, they have to bring it back to the table. I think that's, there are so many different ways in modules that we are working with these frontline activists to come up and not, I don't like the capacity building. I like the enhancing their capacity, because the capacity is already there. And in some of the leaders, like for instance, I was experiencing myself when I was very young, very naive, but with a lot of energy, but sitting in a court, I didn't know what to do with it. So now having a collective voices in building this coalition and giving them these skills, extra skills, so that will definitely help them to be very strategic, very careful, and very policy. It's a kind of more policy-driven advocacies around the issues. And I agree with you. And as I mentioned earlier, in my experience, I did a lot working. I was involved in one of the what is called EVP, Alternative to Violence. That's all also can be one of the, I mean, because this is not part of our work, but still this can be one of the ways that people could just go and experience, because this is a joint experience by the both parties. So I think these are and there are so many other examples that we can bring, but I know that the time probably may not allow it. Thank you so much. I hope it was the answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I see we have 5 minutes left, and I see a question from Julia that sort of connects to where I wanted to go too, which was Akila, and ask Sharon, Karen, not Sharon, Karen. Sharon is here too, but the question is for Karen. She asks to speak a little bit more about the Institute and the situation of women post-genocide, and maybe just to ask my final question on top of that, which is about your vision for women's empowerment and for education in the future.
Oh, thank you. Akila it's really the first and only women's college in Rwanda, and it was started 10 years ago, really because of the dearth of higher education opportunities for women, not just in Rwanda, but across the region. And that the issue was exacerbated by the 1994 genocide, really, where so many women were really left to rebuild their countries and societies. The population actually became 70% female after the genocide. And so women had to be responsible for rebuilding their homes, their families, and society. And education was a critical means to be able to do that. So when we first started 10 years ago, people really thought of us as a school for poor girls, basically. This is where girls would go who couldn't get an education elsewhere. They would say all sorts of wonderful, dismissive things like, it's a baking school for girls, or it's a sewing school for girls, or aren't those girls being trained to just work in the house? And so, I mean, we've had to work really hard over the last 10 years to really show that we are a high quality, market relevant higher education for women. In particular, it just so happens that over 50% of the women come from rural areas, and 78% of the first in their families to attend higher education, which is really astounding. But what I like about the Akila model, and not simply because I worked there, but because of what I said at the beginning of the conversation about the two things that make a fundamental difference in the lives of women and girls are education and the ability to earn an income. What I think is unique about the Akila model is we really start with the private sector and work backwards. We're not starting with the supply, which is so many women need an education, but really the fact that they need a market relevant education that's going to lead to workforce outcomes. So we start with the private sector and work backwards, and have designed our programs to meet the private sector where they are and the needs that they have for employment. And so we offer 3 diplomas right now, one in hospitality management and sustainable tourism, business management, entrepreneurship, and information systems. I think somebody mentioned this about going online. We're putting all of these programs online so that they are accessible and affordable to students, women all across the region. We focus on building their digital literacy skills, their English skills, their technical skills, their market relevant skills, their problem solving skills, critical thinking, everything that they need to be able to enter the workforce. And so it's a model that works. 86% of the graduates of Akila secure jobs within 6 months of graduation. But here's the kicker for me, which we all know about why it's important to invest in women. 81% of those graduates are paying for health care or school fees for other family members. And that multiplier effect is huge. And you see it all over the world, because when we know that when women are earning an income, they're using that income by and large to invest in the health, education, and nutrition of their families. So when I think about the future of global education, it goes back to that statistic that was flashed earlier in this program, knowing that 1 billion women and girls around the world still lack the education and skills they need to participate in the labor market. And that women are particularly underserved when it comes to the digital economy. There's still a major digital gender divide. And we know that COVID has exacerbated a lot of these issues for women. So I think, when I think about the future of education, it really is about having, obviously starting at the girl child, as Joyce said so effectively, because, obviously you don't want to wait till women get to tertiary education. And on the other hand, and I know this for a fact in Malawi and many other places, the girls who somehow manage to make it through primary and secondary school and then have nowhere to go. They can't enter the workforce, right? And they can't go on to higher education. They're sitting at home. And it's almost worse because you've created this expectation of a future that they're not going to have, that they're never going to be able to achieve. And so giving those young women a trajectory to the workforce, to education, so that they can invest in their families in the future, to me is super important. And that starts with having affordable, market-relevant education for women.
So whenever I hear about this issue, I think about Amy Brakeman, who I believe is on the call. I don't know, Amy, if you're able to chime in.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Ina. And I was about to text to say, right on, Karen, love what you're saying. I'm starting another call right at 2 that I actually have to speak on. So I'll say really quickly that because I spent 15, maybe 12 years working on initiatives on the African continent, initiatives led by Africans, I started seeing that a lot of these great initiatives didn't reach one of their goals, which was to have youth get, none of them were gender focused, very few of them were gender focused, but to get youth income earning power. So for the last 5 years, I focused more on what Karen's describing as demand-driven opportunities for skills certification and education that are really systems level changes, things like Harambee in South Africa, Generation, which is McKinsey's initiative in Kenya, others like that, that are now, I'm very excited to hear what Akila's doing because it is very aligned with what we're working on. And in fact, we have a monthly peer learning network of implementing organizations on the continent who help each other deliver on this skill building element. So Karen, I'll certainly follow up with you separately and invite you or your team if anyone wants to participate in that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I don't know, we're at 2 p.m. I've learned a lot, invest in girls before they're 8, work with men, culturally sensitive, think about income generation and linking education to jobs. So there's so much. Karen, thank you so much for writing this book and for making us talk about all these issues. And for those of you who have not yet read it, I would suggest you go out and buy the book. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy Women's Equality Day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.